My daughter said I wasn't expected for Christmas. Those words should have rolled off me like winter frost on a windshield, melting in the heat of fatherly patience. But they didn't. They landed with the weight of years. Years of sacrifice. Years of silence. Years of bending myself into the shape of someone easy to dismiss. I smiled when she said it, nodded even, as if she had spared me some great inconvenience instead of slicing me out of the very holiday I had built around her since the day she was born. She thought I'd take it quietly. She thought wrong. The house smelled of vanilla and pine, the kind of curated holiday scene she had perfected since marrying Ethan. The tree glowed in the corner, strung with ornaments that looked like they belonged in a catalog, not a home. I stood there holding a tin of cookies, the same ones I had made every year, the same ones she used to sneak from the counter when she was little. Sugar dust on her cheeks as she giggled and swore she hadn't touched a thing. She used to look at me then as if I was her hero. Tonight, she looked at me like a problem she needed to manage. "Dad," she began, her smile tight, her eyes darting toward Ethan, who stood smug in the doorway, cufflinks catching the glow of the lights. "We've had some conversations. Ethan's parents will be here for the holiday, and, well, the table's going to be very full. Maybe it would be easier if we celebrated with you the weekend after. Fewer variables." Variables. That's what I had become in her carefully arranged equation of appearances. A variable. Not a father, not the man who signed the second mortgage so she and Ethan could buy this house. Not the man who worked double shifts to cover tuition so she could go to college debt-free. Just a variable to be solved by removing me from the room. Fewer variables, I repeated, each word heavy in my mouth. She softened her tone, thinking kindness could dull the blade. "It's just easier this way. We'll FaceTime you during dessert. The kids can say hello. It'll still be special." Ethan added too brightly, "We'll make it up to you, Dennis. Promise." Promises. They had been my currency with her for years. Promises she forgot as easily as she breathed. Promises I kept paying for, one transfer, one sacrifice at a time. I looked around their living room, hardwood floors I had financed, crown molding I had charged to my own credit. The Viking oven gleaming in the kitchen, bought after she insisted she needed it for her baking phase, which had lasted all of 2 weeks and 3 Instagram posts. Every corner of that house bore my fingerprints, my labor, my love. And now they wanted me gone from it, invisible, uninvited. "Where should I spend Christmas then?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended, but sharp enough to cut the air between us. She hesitated, then offered the kind of answer people give when they've already decided you don't matter. "Maybe with Aunt Rosa? Or we could do something later, just the two of us. I'll make it up to you." I nodded, setting the tin of cookies on their marble island. "I should beat the traffic," I said, 5 words that saved her from having to tell me to leave. Outside, the air slapped cold against my face, harder than any words she could have said. The neighborhood shimmered with warm windows, families gathered around tables where laughter was not conditional. I sat in my truck, hands gripping the wheel, the glow of their house fading in my rearview mirror. Not expected, not welcome, disposable. There's a moment in every life when the ground shifts. A hinge moment when the door you thought would always be open slams shut, and you realize you've been standing outside it all along. That sentence, "You're not expected," was my hinge. I stared at the house I had built with my own sacrifice and realized that all year, for years, I had been giving gifts with receipts no one ever intended to acknowledge. I drove home in silence. Past houses lit with joy I couldn't feel. Past children pressing their faces to frosted windows. Past fathers who would never know the taste of exclusion at their own children's tables. My own house waited in the dark, porch light flickering like it had been trying to die for months. Inside, the air was heavy, stale. Maria's photo watched me from the mantel, her smile frozen in time. She would have told me to forgive, to let it go for Ava's sake. But Maria had also told me once, long ago, that dignity isn't something you beg for. It's something you demand. I sat at the kitchen table, The stack of envelopes staring at me from the corner where I had hidden them. Bank statements, mortgage papers, years of silent sacrifice spelled out in black and white. My hands shook as I pulled them closer, not with regret, but with clarity. Every payment I had made for them had been another nail in the coffin of my own peace. Love without respect is just servitude. And servitude, I decided, had ended tonight. I picked up the phone, dialed the bank. The woman on the other end spoke cheerfully, asking how she could help. "I need to cancel an automatic transfer," I said, my voice steadier than it had any right to be. "Certainly, sir. Which transfer?" $2,800 to Wells Fargo. It's been running for 5 years, effective immediately. A pause, fingers clicking on a keyboard. "Done. The transfer has been canceled. Is there anything else I can help you with?" I closed my eyes. The words tasted better than any Christmas meal I'd been denied. "No," I said. "That's everything." I hung up. The silence in my house transformed. It no longer felt hollow. It felt clean. Outside, December winds rattled the windows, but inside, for the first time in years, I was warm. I poured myself a drink, the good whiskey I had been saving for a special occasion that never came. Tonight was special enough. I raised the glass to Maria's picture, to the man I used to be, and to the man I was becoming. "Merry Christmas to me," I said, and I meant it. The morning after, the quiet of my house felt different. It wasn't silence anymore, it was the echo of a decision. The kettle hissed on the stove, the cheap one I'd bought when I couldn't justify replacing the better model after all my spare money had gone into Ava's dream home. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the table surrounded by the evidence of 5 years of sacrifice. The papers were everywhere now, spread out like a crime scene, and the victim was me. I traced the numbers with my finger. 2,800, month after month, year after year, bleeding out of my account into theirs. $168,000. I whispered the number like a confession. That wasn't even counting the down payment, or the furniture, or the appliances, or the bills I covered when Ethan's paycheck got delayed. Each page was a reminder of how easily love can be weaponized against a man who believes family is worth any cost. As I turned the statements, I remembered each sacrifice with painful clarity. The hardwood floors she had called me crying one night because the contractor was threatening to walk away unless they had the money up front. I had wired the funds before sunrise. The granite countertops Ethan said their friends were laughing at the laminate, that it made the house look cheap. I had paid the invoice without blinking. The Viking oven that had been Ava herself, smiling, telling me it would bring her joy, telling me Maria would have wanted it for her. I had written the check that very afternoon. Maria. The name itself was enough to reopen wounds I had tried to stitch closed. She had been the balance in our family, the one who reminded me that love was more than money, that presents mattered more than gifts. And yet, when she was gone, I convinced myself that spending was how I could keep her alive. For Ava, if I couldn't give her mother any more, at least I could give her comfort. That lie had cost me almost everything. I stood and walked through the rooms of my house. The cracked porch light, the sagging couch, the fridge that hummed too loud at night. All the things I had told myself I would fix next month, while next month's money always belonged to Ava. It was like walking through the ruins of a man I used to be. My phone buzzed again. Ava, then Ethan, then Ava again. Their persistence almost made me laugh. They hadn't wanted me at their table, but now that the transfer had stopped, suddenly I was indispensable. They needed me again, not for my presence, not for my stories, not for my love, just for the flow of money that had propped up their fantasy life. I didn't answer. I let the buzzing stop. I let the silence return. And in that silence, memories surfaced like ghosts. The Christmas Eve 3 years ago, when I'd sat at this very table with a plastic tray of grocery store turkey, waiting for the promised call that never came. The time Ethan had pulled me aside, his tone polite but cold, to suggest that maybe I shouldn't wear my old jacket when their friends visited. It made me look out of place. The way Ava had nodded, embarrassed, pretending she didn't hear. The birthdays spent alone, the graduations I paid for but wasn't invited to plan, the countless little moments where I swallowed humiliation for the sake of being included. Inclusion, what a bitter word. It suggested that family was some club I had to audition for, pay dues for, smile through rejection for. But family isn't supposed to be conditional. It isn't supposed to be earned. And yet, in Ava's world, my worth had always been negotiable. Measured in deposits and transfers, not love. I sat back down at the table, staring at the pile of papers. Each one told the same story. A man who loved too much, gave too much, asked for too little in return. And now, that man was gone. I opened the drawer and pulled out Maria's old rosary, the one she kept by her bedside. My fingers moved across the beads like they remembered the path better than my mind did. For a moment, I let myself feel the grief, the hollow ache of everything I had lost, not just her, but Ava too, though in a different way. Maria had been taken by illness. Ava had been taken by greed. But grief alone wouldn't define me anymore, not this time. I placed the rosary beside the papers and leaned forward, elbows on the table. For years I had been feeding a machine that never gave anything back, and now that machine was sputtering, choking, desperate. I imagined Ava at her kitchen counter, phone in hand, panic in her voice as she realized the money wasn't coming. I imagined Ethan trying to hide his frustration, his pride clashing with his fear. I imagined the perfect holiday table, set for guests who had no idea their host's empire was built on someone else's back. That image didn't make me sad. It made me smile. Because for the first time in years, the power was mine. The rest of the day unfolded in a haze of clarity. I cleaned the counters. I fixed the flickering bulb in the hallway. I swept the porch. Small acts of reclaiming my space, my life. With every nail hammered, every corner dusted, I felt myself returning. I wasn't the man waiting by the phone anymore. I wasn't the man counting pennies so my daughter could host dinners that I wasn't invited to. I was the man who decided where his money went, and for the first time in 5 years, it wasn't going to them. Night fell, and I sat on the porch with a blanket, watching the neighborhood twinkle with lights. I thought about Ava as a child, running barefoot through the yard, hair wild, laughter filling the summer air. I thought about the promises I had made to her then, that she would always be safe, that she would always be loved, that I would always be there. And I realized I had kept those promises far longer than she had deserved them. The phone buzzed again. I didn't even check who it was. I let it buzz, then fall silent, then buzz again. Their panic was growing, and with it, their desperation. And me? I just sat there, sipping whiskey, breathing in the cold December night, finally at peace with the truth. Sometimes the deepest wound comes not from enemies, but from the people you loved most. And sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply refusing to bleed for them any longer. I closed my eyes and whispered into the night. This is just the beginning. The call to the bank had been simple, almost too simple. Years of servitude undone with a few keystrokes on a stranger's computer. I had expected some kind of ceremony, some weighty confirmation that the world had shifted. But it was just a quiet voice on the other end saying, "Done." And just like that, the lifeline that had kept their world afloat was severed. The next morning, the panic began. My phone lit up before sunrise, Ava's name glowing on the screen like an alarm. I let it ring, then Ethan, then Ava again. By the third call, I turned the phone face down and poured myself coffee. The first sip tasted different, stronger, like victory. I imagined the scene in their kitchen, Ava pacing in silk slippers, Ethan scrolling furiously through their banking app, both of them trying to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe Dad forgot. They would exhaust every explanation except the truth that I had chosen, finally, to stop. By noon, the text came. Short at first. "Dad, can you call me?" Then longer, more desperate. "We don't know what's happening with the mortgage. Please answer." I read them slowly, savoring each word, the way one savors a fine meal. Desperation has its own flavor, and theirs was rich. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked through my house, seeing it with new eyes. The cracked paint in the hallway, the leaky faucet in the bathroom, the worn cushions on the couch, all the things I had ignored while their house sparkled with renovations. These were mine. My flaws, my burdens, my truths. And for the first time in years, I felt no shame in them, because at least they were honest. Later that evening, I sat at my desk and opened the manila folder again. Bank statements, receipts, letters, the full history of my generosity laid out like evidence in a trial. I traced the numbers with a pen, not to remind myself of the loss, but to prepare myself for what came next. Because canceling the payment was only step one. Step two was making sure they understood exactly what they had lost. The following day, Ava left a voicemail. Her voice was calm at first, rehearsed. "Dad, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Maybe the bank made a mistake. Can you just call me back so we can fix this?" Then her tone shifted, the mask slipping. "Please, Dad, we need to talk. This is serious." I replayed it 3 times, letting the sound of her panic wash over me. For years, she had held the power in every conversation, deciding when I was welcome, when I was useful, when I was nothing more than a background character in her perfect little play. Now the roles were reversed. Now she was the one begging for a response. I poured myself another drink and raised the glass to the empty room. "To misunderstandings," I said, and let the whiskey burn its way down. Days passed. The calls multiplied. Ethan tried his hand at persuasion, his voice cold, calculated. "Dennis, listen. This is affecting more than just us. The kids need stability. Think about what this is doing to them." His words might have carried weight once, but I knew the truth. The kids had more stability than I ever did growing up. What they didn't have was parents willing to live within their means. I deleted the message without finishing it. By the end of the week, the tone of their messages had changed completely. No more politeness, no more pretending, just raw panic. "We're going to lose the house if this doesn't get fixed. Dad, please, we can't make it without you. Don't do this to us." Don't do this to us, as if I hadn't been doing everything for them all along, as if I hadn't sacrificed my own life to give them theirs. The hypocrisy was almost laughable. That night I sat by the fireplace, the documents spread across the coffee table. Each one was a chapter in the story they wanted to erase. The down payment, the renovations, the monthly payments, all highlighted in yellow like scars on paper. Together they told the truth they had spent years hiding, that their life, their comfort, their Christmases, all of it was built on me. And now that foundation was gone. The next morning, I made another call. Not to the bank this time, but to myself. To the man I used to be before Ava and Ethan had turned me into a walking ATM. I promised him that this was only the beginning. That every humiliation, every insult, every dismissal would be repaid in full. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Not because I had taken something from them, but because I had reclaimed something for myself. My dignity, my power, my place at the table, not theirs, but mine. The calls didn't stop. The texts didn't stop. But I didn't answer. I let them spiral. I let them taste fear. Because fear, I realized, is the only language they truly understood. And as I sat there, sipping coffee in my quiet little house, I smiled, because Christmas was coming, and this year, it wasn't going to be theirs to control. The silence I had given them didn't last long. Desperation has a way of breeding strategy, and Ava's family was nothing if not strategic when it came to protecting their image. I should have expected it. In fact, part of me had been waiting for it. The moment when their panic turned into action. They were never the type to sit quietly and accept consequences. They were fighters, but not the honorable kind. They fought with appearances, with lies, with the weight of influence, bought and borrowed. The first sign came in the form of a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring, as I always did now, but the voicemail made my stomach turn. A woman's voice, smooth and professional. "Mr. Flores, this is Patricia Morrison from the Spokane Review. I'd love to talk with you regarding some concerns that have been raised about your behavior over the holidays. Please call me back as soon as possible." Concerns, behavior, holidays. The words strung together in a way that immediately told me who was behind it. Cody Jenkins, Ava's father-in-law. Banker, social climber, a man who had spent decades learning how to twist truth into reputation. He had finally decided to play his card. 2 days later, the article hit. Page 3 of the local paper, lifestyle section, with a headline designed to wound. "Local man abandons elderly couple at airport during holiday storm." My name printed beneath it in bold. A photo pulled from my old business website. Smile frozen, eyes brighter than I felt now. The story painted me as cruel, unstable, erratic. Cody and Catherine described waiting in frigid temperatures for hours, stranded because I had forgotten to pick them up. They claimed I ignored their calls, that I left them vulnerable in dangerous weather conditions. Dangerous weather? It had been 52 degrees and sunny. But the article didn't care about truth. It cared about spectacle. I read every word slowly, twice, then a third time. Each sentence was another knife. No mention of the years of payments I had made, the sacrifices, the humiliation I had endured at their table. No context about the Christmas rejection, the decision that had cut me out of the family I had built. Just a portrait of an unhinged old man, cruel and heartless, abandoning the people who welcomed him into their family. My phone lit up again that afternoon. Neighbors, old friends. Some didn't bother leaving voicemails, but others did, their voices laced with disappointment or pity. "Dennis, what happened?" I read the paper, and I just want to say, "I hope you're okay. Hope I'm okay." As if I had been caught doing something shameful. As if the shame belonged to me, not to the people who had orchestrated the entire thing. I sat at the table, the newspaper spread out in front of me, Maria's picture watching from the mantel. For the first time in this entire battle, I felt the sting of real danger. Reputation was everything in a town like Spokane. One article could undo decades of work, paint me as a villain in the eyes of people who would never hear my side. Cody knew that. Cody was counting on that. But if Cody thought I would roll over, he had miscalculated. I opened my laptop and began to dig. Social media profiles, old news clippings, business directories. Their lives were curated, yes, but curation leaves a trail. Catherine's Instagram was a museum of indulgence wine tastings, charity lunches, vacations in places that cost more than I made in a year. Ava's Facebook was filled with check-ins at restaurants she couldn't afford without me, captions bragging about a lifestyle I had financed. Ethan's LinkedIn proudly displayed connections, the very ones that had helped plant the poison in the newspaper. And Cody had his name tied to half a dozen local organizations, all of them built on the illusion of respectability. I saw the pattern instantly. Their power wasn't in who they were. It was in who they convinced others they were. That made them vulnerable. Because all it would take was one crack, one undeniable truth to shatter the illusion they had spent years polishing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the living room, the paper still sitting on the table like a challenge. My hands shook, not with fear, but with fury. For years they had taken from me quietly, smiling, polite. And now, when the money stopped, they dared to paint me as unstable, cruel, unworthy of respect. I poured myself another glass of whiskey and stood at the window, watching snow fall under the streetlight. My reflection stared back at me older, worn, but not broken, not anymore. "You declared war," I whispered to the empty room. "Fine, then war is what you'll get." The next morning I started printing. Bank statements, receipts, mortgage documents. I highlighted every payment, every sacrifice, every dollar that had left my hands and entered theirs. I printed photos from their social media. The vacations, the jewelry, the expensive dinners, all time-stamped against the payments I had made. A catalog of hypocrisy, a timeline of their greed. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm, focused. They had their article. I had the truth. And the truth was sharper than any headline. When the phone rang again, I didn't even look at the screen. I let it ring, let it buzz, let it fall silent. Then I picked up one of the highlighted statements and smiled. Because the war they thought they had started was already lost. They just didn't know it yet. The morning after the article, I woke with a calm I hadn't felt in years. Rage had burned through me like a storm. But storms don't last forever. What comes after is clarity, and clarity is sharper than anger. Clarity knows where to strike. The newspaper lay on the counter where I had left it, the headline glaring at me, like an accusation. I slid it aside, revealing the manila folder beneath. My evidence. My weapon. The only truth that mattered. While they had painted me as unstable, I was sitting on a mountain of undeniable proof numbers, receipts, documents that could tell a story louder than any headline. I brewed coffee and set everything out on the table like a general reviewing his arsenal before battle. The down payment, highlighted in green. The mortgage transfers, page after page, highlighted in yellow. The renovations, appliances, furniture, landscaping, highlighted in red. Then the photos. Ava at a restaurant in Seattle the very same week I paid their overdue property tax. Ethan in a new suit, cufflinks gleaming, posted 2 days after I wired them money to fix their emergency plumbing. Catherine's smug smile at a charity auction, glass of wine in hand. Bought with the very cash they had squeezed out of me while pretending I was nothing but an embarrassment. I organized them chronologically. 5 years of a life built on my back. By the time I was finished, the story told itself. A man who gave everything, and a family who took until there was nothing left. I sat there for hours, staring at the piles, letting the silence of the house sharpen my resolve. They thought they had me cornered. They thought their article had made me small. But they didn't understand. The smaller they made me look, the bigger the truth would loom when I finally revealed it. My phone buzzed again. Isabella this time, her name flashing across the screen like poison. I let it ring until the voicemail cut in. Her voice was syrupy sweet at first, then laced with steel. Dennis, we need to move past this. My parents are humiliated, and frankly, you should be too. You've made a spectacle of yourself, and everyone is talking. If you want any relationship with this family, you'll make the payments again, immediately. I replayed it once, then twice, then deleted it. She still thought money was the only language I understood. She didn't realize I had already learned a new one. Silence. Silence was power. Silence made them sweat. The rest of that week, I kept to my rituals. Coffee at dawn, walks around the neighborhood, repairs to the house I had neglected for too long. My neighbors waved, asked how I was doing, mentioned the article in careful tones. I just smiled and told them not to believe everything they read. Behind that smile, though, my mind was moving like clockwork, planning, refining, waiting for the right moment. Because revenge, real revenge, isn't rushed. It's crafted, like laying bricks, one by one, steady and patient, until the wall towers so high, your enemies never see it coming, until it collapses on them. Christmas Eve, that was the date circled on my calendar, bright red, not for celebration, not for family, for justice. They were hosting dinner, 12 people invited, all part of the same circle that whispered and nodded over articles in the local paper. Their audience, their stage, and I planned to burn the stage down. Every night, I added to the folder. More screenshots, more receipts, more proof. I wrote notes in the margins of the article itself. Lie, false, missing context, I rehearsed in my head the words I would say when the time came. How I would stand before their guests and strip away every illusion. I didn't need to raise my voice. The truth would do the shouting for me. As the days crept closer, their calls grew frantic. Ethan demanded. Ava pleaded. Isabella scolded. Even Cody tried once. His voice cold and threatening. You don't know who you're messing with, Dennis. I've built a reputation in this town that will bury you if you keep pushing. I laughed after that one. The kind of laugh that doesn't come from humor, but from the certainty of knowing something your enemy doesn't. He had built his reputation like a castle of glass, and I was already holding the stone. On the night of December 23rd, I sat in my living room, surrounded by neatly stacked packets of documents, 12 in total, one for each guest. My hands ran over the covers, the weight of the paper solid and undeniable. Each packet was a confession, but not mine, theirs. Proof that every bite of food, every stick of furniture, every square foot of that house had been bought with money that wasn't theirs. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and stood at the window, watching snow fall gently over the street. My reflection in the glass looked older, yes, but stronger too. The man staring back at me wasn't the one who had been dismissed as a variable. He wasn't the man who waited by the phone, desperate for scraps of affection. He was something else now, something harder. The world outside was quiet, families tucked into warmth, children dreaming of gifts, and in that quiet, I smiled to myself. Tomorrow, their world would shatter. Tomorrow, the lies would end. Justice doesn't always come with handcuffs or courtrooms. Sometimes it comes in silence, in patience, in waiting for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. And my moment was less than 24 hours away. They were ready for a festive house, for the clink of wine glasses and polite laughter, for the soft sound of their carefully curated lives aligning under one roof. They were not ready for the weight of paper. They were not ready for truth, dressed in manila. I walked in carrying the briefcase like a harmless accessory, a nicety you bring to a stranger's party, a little odd, perhaps, but hardly dangerous. The door opened, and I stepped into the glow of chandeliers and conversation. For a moment I let them look at me, an older man in a navy suit, tie straight, hair combed, the kind of image they had always believed made a man respectable. I smiled, the way people smile before a good story. Their smiles were brittle. I could see the edges already. Good evening, I said, setting the briefcase on the sideboard as if it belonged there. Nobody stopped me. That made it even better. I moved through the room, nodding at faces I could name. Catherine's charity friends with their compassionate air, the banker acquaintances who'd nodded during the article's run, neighbors who had judged me from a distance. I placed my briefcase on the marble and unlatched it slowly, irritable with the theater of it all. I had 12 packets, one for each guest. I arranged them on the sideboard like place cards, neatly, definitively, with a simplicity that made the room hush even before I spoke. The clinking of cutlery faded. Glasses hovered in the air. Someone swallowed. A woman near the table asked, her voice small, whether I was lost. I looked at her and smiled. I don't think so. When I spoke, I did not raise my voice. There was no need. The article had done the shouting. Now I simply offered the response. You have an article about me that calls me cruel, unstable, dangerous, I began. I thought it only fair you see the receipts of the life you enjoy so much. I opened the first packet and laid it down. Bank statements, highlighted entries, a down payment receipt with my name typed across the front. The nearest guest picked it up, eyes tracing numbers that made their polite expressions crumble into confusion. They tried the usual maneuvers at first: denial, anger, the quick, practiced outrage of people who assume truth is something they can buy. This is a misunderstanding, Cody snapped, voice loud enough to fill the room. We never asked. His sentence died as Catherine's fingers trembled over a page where she had posted a photo of a necklace 3 months after I'd sent money to cover their overdue utilities. The necklace glittered on her Instagram feed with the caption, "Finally treating myself." The date beside the post matched a highlighted transfer in my folder. One by one, I placed the packets in front of the guests. A photograph of Ethan at a swanky restaurant, caption boasting about a promotion. The post, time-stamped the same week I covered a tax bill. A receipt for a $47,000 down payment, a signed document showing the source of funds. The room didn't erupt. It uncoiled. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A child's song from the other room faded into the background like a memory. People read. They passed pages to one another, whispers rising. He paid for that? Is that? Faces changed from hospitable to horrified to ashamed. Ava stood frozen near the hearth, wine glass clutched but forgotten. She looked smaller than the photographs she posted, thinner in the place where a daughter should be large and unashamed. Michael's face had turned a peculiar color ash with a sheen of fear. He tried to step toward me, mouth forming a protest that sounded like a plea. "Dad," he started. I cut him off with a look that asked whether he had ever thought about what it meant to call someone father. He faltered. The guests looked on like jurors, witnesses to a slow unmasking. Cody tried the final weapon in his arsenal, the threat. "You can't do this. You'll destroy us. I'll make sure." He didn't finish because a woman in pearls, one of Catherine's friends, spoke up, her voice not unkind but quiet and fierce. "What have you done to him?" She asked the table, meaning the family. "You've made a man give himself away and then turned him into a villain when he stopped." The words landed like a bell. Heads turned. Eyes that had once admired Cody's status now registered a different calculation: complicity. Someone took out a phone and began to call a lawyer. Another sent a text to a friend at the paper. The dinner that was supposed to be velvet with laughter was now a tangle of receipts and the clatter of reputation falling apart. The faces that had once looked down at me were forced to look at me as a human being who had been used, not as charity, not as a punchline, as the man who had loved and paid and finally refused to be invisible. After an hour that felt like a lifetime, the noise thinned. A few guests left, shoulders tight with the awkwardness of being complicit, the kind of withdrawal that signals a social death. Others lingered, not out of solidarity, but because curiosity has a hard backbone. They read my packets again, tracing totals and dates like detectives confirming a conspiracy. The youngest at the table, unexpected, an employee of one of Cody's companies, looked up at me with a softness that surprised me. "I had no idea," he said, honestly. Sometimes the most damning thing is the astonishment of people who believed nothing could be wrong. When it was finally quiet, Michael approached me. His voice had lost the performance it relied on. "Dad, I'm sorry," he said, stumbling. "I didn't." He faltered, eyes wet. The son I raised as someone who would never choose comfort over family's truth had been replaced by a man who had traded my presence for a lifestyle. The apology sounded thin and late, but it was a crack. I could have struck harder. I could have let anger shape my response. Instead, I put a packet in front of him, one that listed the payments in full, the ledger of loyalty spent. "Read it," I said. "Then go home and think about it." He didn't argue. He didn't try to bargain. He took the folder like a man carrying the weight of his own failure. Later, much later, he would come back around in ways that would surprise us both. But that evening, the important thing was that he had the evidence and nowhere left to hide. In the days that followed, the paper that had printed the initial smear ran a new kind of story, not a headline crafted by a friend wielding influence, but one grounded in documents and payment records. When Patricia Morrison was confronted with the stack of evidence, the angle shifted. Journalists, after all, are animals of proof. The local rumor mill that had once fed on rumor now chewed on dates and bank statements. Social media, always hungry for a narrative, turned its appetite to proof. People began to talk not about my alleged cruelty, but about the strange, quiet violence of entitlement. Cody's board members called meetings. Catherine's charity friends kept their distance. Ava's social circle, who once drooled over images of a life built by someone else's generosity, found themselves awkward and defensive. Mortgage companies sent letters. The banks notice, the same instrument they had once shrugged off as mere paperwork, now become tangible reality against Michael and Isabella's address. Notice of default, final demand. The house that had been a symbol of everything they claimed was theirs, suddenly counted in numbers, arrears, late fees, foreclosure timeline. I did not gloat. There was no jubilation in watching hardship find them. What I felt was something quieter, more profound. I felt relief, a reclamation of dignity that had nothing to do with charity and everything to do with boundaries. The people who had once taken from me now had to reckon with the consequences of their choices. They had to look at the world they'd constructed and see whose hands had built it. Michael came to my house timidly a month later, the kind of visit that begged for permission. He sat at my table, the same table where I had written the ledger, and he spoke in ways he hadn't before, about embarrassment, about shame, about realizing the depth of what his mother and in-laws had done to his father. He wanted to make it right. He wanted to rebuild. I listened. Forgiveness, I told him, is not erasure. It's a slow rebuilding, brick by brick. You show me you mean it by how you live your life, not by words at a tobacco-stained holiday table. Isabella texted once, long after the court notices and the calls from mortgage servicers. She asked for money, as if nothing had shifted. I read the message and then deleted it. Some bridges aren't meant to be walked across again. Some lessons are learned only when the furniture is sold, when the yard signs appear, when your lifestyle requires honesty. In the town, conversations changed. People who once nodded at Cody's anecdotes now wondered aloud about the cost of kindness, when kindness comes with bills attached. The charity lunches grew quieter, the smiles thinner. Catherine's invitations dwindled. Reputation, it turned out, has a price as volatile as any market. You can build a facade and finance it with another's life, but when the ledger is revealed, the facade becomes brittle. I kept living. I fixed the porch light. I bought better coffee. I called Rosa and accepted the invitation she had offered me the year I was told I wasn't expected. Her table was loud, full, honest. The children ran barefoot like Ava used to, and no one's manners were learned from a magazine. There was warmth there, not curated but real. It tasted like sundaes and soup and people who knew how to show up without asking for a receipt. On a late spring afternoon, I walked past the house that had once been the center of my sacrifice. A notice had been posted in the window. Foreclosure sale date. The roses in the front bed had been left to wilt. I didn't feel joy at their loss. Pleasure at another's pain would have been petty. Instead, I felt the clean sweep of completion. It was a line drawn, a chapter closed. The final twist of the story is not always violent. Sometimes justice is simply the quiet consequence of choices. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is a life rebuilt on honesty, the small pleasures of a porch light that works and a neighbor who stops to chat without an agenda. Sometimes it's sitting in a kitchen where the coffee is real and the company is real and knowing you didn't pay for any of it with your dignity. If you ask me what I learned, I'd say this: generosity without boundaries becomes self-erasure. Respect cannot be purchased. And dignity, once given back to you, is the most expensive thing to regain and the most priceless to keep. Sold when the yard signs appear, when your lifestyle requires honesty.